everybody, and welcome back. This is our final time together as we go through this book called 7 Myths of Singleness. Hope you've enjoyed your discussion and prayer times and sharing times together, and I'm sure you've had some rich fellowship as well as you get to know each other better and as you speak about this important topic of singleness and how we navigate it as Christians. Today this time we're going to hear from Pastor Matt, and he's going to go over the 7th chapter, which is about the myth that singleness is easy. So he has some summarizing points, and we'll then go to some highlights.
Yeah, so this chapter is kind of the flip side of how the book began, talking about the myth of singleness being too hard. So now we're addressing the myth that the singleness is too easy. And Sam Allberry spent most of this book trying to show how singleness isn't awful, but it's good. But he spends this last chapter pointing out that the danger then is to just start thinking that singleness is fun and easy. It's a blast. And he says on page 124, let's see here. He says that the danger of this exercise is that we end up thinking singleness is just a blast. And then he goes and says, marriage and singleness, as I hope we've seen, are both good gifts from God, ways in which we can experience God's goodness. But in a fallen world, they're gifts that come with unique difficulties. Neither is easy, both are painful. Each has its ups and downs, and the ups and downs of each look different to those of the other. So the danger is that we compare the downs of our situation with the ups of the alternative. We singles easily look at the ups of marriage and compare them to the downs of singleness, and it is just as easy for married people to do the same in reverse. So after talking about the usually overlooked ups of singleness, he says we need to talk about the downs. And he talks at length then about life experiences of his and some of his friends or fellow authors that show how hard it can be to be a Christian and single in this day and age. And I'm sure that many of you have felt a whole host of these at times in your life. Some of these things might seem small, but he points out that sometimes it's the small everyday things that are the most painful, and they're more painful than the big dramatic moments. The daily reminders that you're doing on your own what feels like you should be doing with others. Or how many awkward conversations have we experienced where people speculate on when others will settle down or get married or get their turn. And then even more painful than that, he points out, is when people stop speculating altogether. And you yourself realize that life isn't only not going how you planned, but that it probably won't ever do so. Meanwhile, so many Christians see marriage as a mark of maturity, a rite of passage, a sign that you've grown up. And I thought that as I read this is such a vital chapter for married people to read, to better understand the experiences of our Christian brothers and sisters. Remember, we're all part of the same body and the same family. What happens to one member automatically impacts all the others. And if we truly love our family in Christ, then we should care about each other anyway. So Sam has some really wise cautions to those who are married, to realize that when we get married and the shape of our friendships change, how much it can hurt our single friends if we simply demote them out of our lives. Or to realize how bittersweet weddings can be for single people. Or to realize the pressures that singles feel to always show the initiative if a friendship is to continue on. Like, how much better can we do to show others that we're thinking of them, caring for them, and want them to be part of our lives? I was personally super convicted when I first read this chapter. Often, single people may need their married friends for company more than the married people need their single friends. But that can be really painful for singles or hard for them to navigate. Allberry goes on to talk about how when a good friend moves away, that can be extra challenging. As when a family moves, they have each other. They move together. They're inseparable. But a single person can be more easily separated from, and that can hurt. He goes on to say how there are many anxieties or fears or depressive thoughts that a single person experiences that others don't necessarily go through, or at least to the same degree. And the chapter wraps up with a masterful meditation, I think, on the trustworthiness of God. That even in the midst of such hard things, God still gives us all much grace. Sam references Kathy Keller when he talks about how many of the single people's or single person's anxieties, or anyone's anxieties really, stem from imagining life without the presence and the grace of God in it. Kathy says here that God doesn't play that game. He doesn't inject hypothetical grace into your hypothetical nightmare situation so that you would know what it would actually feel like if you ever did end up in that situation. And Sam adds, he only gives grace for our actual situation. And there are many important truths that singles need to remind themselves of, like the comforting fact that God searches us and knows us. He knows our fears. He knows our needs better than we do. He loves us more than we love ourselves. He's more committed to our ultimate joy than we are. And therefore, we can trust him. I think there's a fabulous observation at the top of page 142 that I want to make sure that we all hear very clearly. It says this: the key to contentment as a single person is not trying to make singleness into something that will satisfy us. It is to find contentment in Christ as a single person. The key to contentment as a married person is not trying to build a marriage that can make us content. It is to find contentment in Christ as a married person. This is liberating. It means that my contentment is not contingent on my marital status or on the number and depth of my friendships. These are not the most significant determiners of what will make life ultimately work. We need to consider the force of these words of Jesus in John 6:35. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. Only Jesus can satisfy. Only in Jesus can we be truly content. And Allberry concludes chapter 7 by reminding us that life can be hard for any one of us, married and unmarried. Both life situations can be awesome, both can be agonizing. So we need to be reminded of God's power over us. There's so much in life that we can't handle, but there's nothing that he can't. And then finally, in his conclusion, Sam quickly takes us to Psalm 23 and reminds us that God's goodness and mercy shall follow us all the days of our lives. So again, we can trust him. All right, I've already shared some of my highlights as I summarize these things. Pastor Kenny, how about you? What stood out to you in this chapter?
Yeah, sure. I found on page 128 some nuggets here that I found were worth mentioning. He says, being single in our 20s and early 30s can be wildly different from being single in our late 30s and 40s. In our 20s, life can easily seem like an episode of Friends. Most of our friends are not yet married, and it is relatively easy to be in and out of one another's lives on a daily basis. Students have a few years of sharing dorms or houses with good friends. Everyone is around and available. You don't really have to do anything on your own, and if you don't want to. Friendship is on tap. Even the mundane things, laundry, running errands, housework, cooking, end up being done with others. There's a wonderful camaraderie to it. But once peers get into serious relationships and then marry, the dynamics of friendship can change dramatically. And certainly we've seen this in our own church, that there are times when we go from 20s to 30s and maybe 30s to 40s where singleness becomes difficult in different ways. And seeing your friends get married sometimes can be difficult for us or for people who are single. So we don't want to downplay that. And like you were saying at the very beginning, I think this was important for me to hear. It was a challenge for me because I must put myself in the shoes of my brothers and sisters who are going through that right now. So there are many 20s and maybe even teenagers in our church that are enjoying their singleness, and it feels like, as Sam says, that your friendship's on tap. But as you age as well, the contentment that we have in Christ, finding our satisfaction in Christ, will probably take the community to help us to do that and find Christ in our singleness and to find our satisfaction in Him. So that was my highlight.
That's great. We also had a single young woman at Calvary who gave us her thoughts on this chapter as well. And she agreed with a lot of Sam's experiences, how hard they can be, such as people who perceive single people as less mature or not grown up, or how single people can feel left behind when their friends get married. All of us in the church need to be aware of these types of things. And then she also said that overthinking or worrying about future possibilities to dread, like dying alone, being forgotten, everyone leaving, don't really go away, but they can be diminished. And that's where God gives us the actual grace in our situations. Then she quotes from Sam in saying, whatever our station in life, we live with uncertainty. It's not a problem of singleness, it's a problem of life. The only guarantee is that Christ will never leave us or forsake us. He is the only one we can be sure will stick by us. And finally she concludes, we must depend on God's power that is immeasurably greater through the difficulties of life. It's a good word.
It is, for sure. Well, it has been such a blessing to go through this as a church, and I'm sure it has been to you as well. And this is our last video together, so may the Lord bless you, and we hope you've enjoyed this as much as we have.